I guess I really don't know what Christmas is all about. Isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about? Sure, Charlie Brown. I can tell you what Christmas is all about.
You tell them I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Hello, this is Michael Hart, and each according to a CBS News poll. We'll also visit with our good friend right here in Birmingham, Alabama, Joe Lockett, host of the Joe Lockett Show and Outspoken on Charter 80 on Thursday. Actually, I'm on Thursday nights. I'll be on there tomorrow night. But we are going to be talking about the E.J. Bradford decision and Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall. All the big and national media outlets are in Birmingham to review this particular decision. There was protest last evening. There will be more protests to come. So we are going to get into that in the 9 o'clock hour. That'll be the only two stories that we cover in that hour, and your phone calls will be welcome at that point at 929-477-3761. So first off, we're going to do a little bit of, interesting peculiarities. You know, in the book, The Life of Reason, philosopher, writer, and essayist George Santayana famously penned the words, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And what he was referring to are the failures that occur when people do not learn from their past mistakes and continue in their, misguided ways. And in a larger sense, the tragedies that can occur when societies fail to learn, buries the truth of their mistakes, or even revises atrocities or simply forgets. Over the last several centuries, whether through human error, false reporting, or simple neglect, history has all too often been the victim of forgetfulness or, in many cases, revision. Now, this program is chock full of historical trivia that many people have either forgotten, never knew, or were never taught. It also serves to set the record straight by smashing some of the most enduring myths and outright lies that have persisted throughout the history of America. And so you're going to learn some of the most famous Americans that shaped this nation, as well as people you may never have heard of that the history books either ignored or whose stories were forgotten, altered, or considered not worth telling until now. On today's program, we're going to take a trip into the past and explore some of the presidential peculiarities. There have been a lot of folks in the last couple of years that have said, well, look at old Donald Trump. He's one more weird cookie. Is he? Let's compare him to the last, 240 plus years of presidents in this nation. Not all of them had their just eccentricities, but some of them had some very bizarre ones. And so we'll break into that. And this is a part of the Unknown America Project. And this is our attempt. It's an extension of the Michael Hart Show from the old terrestrial days. It is an attempt to, if not educate people, certainly point to the issues of education in this country and how many people are just completely lost when it comes to this nation, her past, her present, what's going on, why things are happening. And to give you an example, and one of the things that I try to look towards is either, pointing out education or the lack thereof, or even bringing them some kind of a historical reference on a story of the day. And there has been a lot of debate about the State of the Union address in recent weeks, particularly on the heels of the shutdown. And we are, we're looking at another one about 10 days out. But what was interesting last evening is that while the president was delivering his remarks to the upper and lower chambers of the United States Congress, and there were some highlight moments for him as it related to the Democrats. Nancy Pelosi decided to get her on her feet more than one time last evening. A lot of standing ovations and even a happy birthday song. But what was interesting is that throughout the course of the evening, Nancy Pelosi kept looking at notes, and she would go to the pages and turn the pages over and put them back down, look them back up again. Social media is all aflame this morning on what in the world Nancy could have been looking at. Oh my gosh, what was it? Was it the Mueller investigation papers? And the conspiracy theories are flying all over the internet. And yet again, Americans prove how unbelievably ignorant of reality they can certainly be. It is required by the executive branch to give the Speaker of the House a copy of the speech prior to beginning the speech. Moreover, it's typically distributed to pretty much everybody else in D.C. That is how the Democrats are able to craft their response or the opposing party's response. So what Nancy was looking at was Trump's speech, and most likely was looking to see if he was going rogue, because we do have some audio that would sound like perhaps he was about to leave the reservation, take a trip and never leave the farm, so to speak, pulled himself back in rather quickly, and you can see Nancy picking up the papers and looking to see whether or not that was, in fact, part of the formal speech. And then, of course, you got the obligatory eye roll that whether they're a Democrat or Republican seems to be mandated whenever a president of an opposing party gives the speech or the State of the Union. But for all of the social media wackadoodles out there that think there was some kind of nefarious conspiracy theory or that Nancy was up to something, no, ladies and gentlemen, it is part of the House of Representative rules that the Speaker, and as a courtesy, the Vice President is given a copy as well. But then again, they already had them. But you can calm down. You can stop getting into your Twitter wars and your Facebook conspiracy theories and get back to maybe doing something creative, like, I don't know, read a book. Because if more people read books on history in this nation, we would not have half the problems, half the discussions, half the debates, and half the shutdowns that we have had in this nation's history. So, considering the approval rate last evening, and it is the high 70s, according to even the most liberal outlets, just how whack is Donald Trump? He made some very interesting points that we will cover in about 45 minutes or so. But we want to compare and contrast his, peculiarities, if you will, to some previous presidents. This is contained in the book, The Unknown America, which can be found at theunknownamerica.com. You can also download it on Amazon, on your Kindle, if you are so compelled. We are halfway through Unknown America for Kids, which hopefully will be released here in about, a month or so. And then probably sometime early summer, late spring, The Unknown America 2 will be out. And you guys have been so unbelievably supportive of this project over the last several years, and we appreciate it so very much. So, presidents in the past, some of them were weird. Some of them just have oddities attached to them. Some of them were downright eccentric, but they were all human. And that's one of the things that I think sometimes we fail to see in our politicians and our leaders and in this unbelievably incestuous, celebrity-fascinated culture that we live in today, where we place so much emphasis on every little aspect of somebody's life. And we seem to forget that many people that lead this nation currently and in her past are just like you and I. They're human with their frailties, their foibles, and their, failings. Thomas Jefferson actually wrote his own epitaph on his tombstone. It states that he was the author of the Declaration of Independence, the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, that he was the father of the University of Virginia. But it made no mention whatsoever that he had ever been president of the United States. It is also well known that Thomas Jefferson liked to party. He was known to throw frequent, lavish parties, spending up to $50 a day, which is about $980 in today's currency. He spent this money on food and wine. Incidentally, for all intent and purposes, Jefferson died broke. His books, his library, purchased by the United States Congress for the purposes of helping him alleviate his debts. These books would become the Library of Congress. John Quincy Adams, he loved a skinny dip in the Potomac River. There's a visual for you. Andrew Jackson was involved in over 100 duels, most to defend the honor of his wife, Rachel. He had a bullet in his chest from an 1806 duel and another bullet in his arm from a barroom fight in 1813 with Missouri Senator Thomas Hart Benton. No relation. Martin Van Buren. His given name was actually spelled Martin. It was a family name. When he wrote his autobiography after serving as president, he didn't mention his wife of 12 years, the wife of his 5 children. Her name was Hannah. Didn't mention her even once. There was a lot at this point in American history of, and I've made the point in the past as well, that there's a lot of narcissism that follows this office. So in the case of Andrew Jackson, he's defending the honor of his wife, Rachel, but by extension, he's really defending his own honor because they're besmirching his wife. But Thomas Jefferson likes to party. John Quincy Adams likes to skinny dip. Andrew Jackson likes to shoot people. Martin Van Buren forgets that he was ever married. And then we get to John Tyler. Tyler had more children than any other president. He had 8 by his first wife, Letitia, who was the First Lady of the United States from 1841 until her death in 1842, and 7 by his second wife, Julia, who served as First Lady. He was 70 years of age when his last child, Pearl, was born. It is interesting to know we've actually had a couple of different presidents that have 2 First Ladies during their administrations. Not simultaneously, but I think you got that. In 1848, Zachary Taylor was nominated to be president by the Whig Party without his knowledge or presence at the nominating convention. The Whigs sent him notification of the nomination without the postage being paid. The party expected Taylor to pay for the letter that informed him that he was the nominee. He refused to pay the postage and did not find out about the nomination until weeks later. Franklin Pierce. Pierce was a well-known alcoholic. In fact, he was criticized during the campaign and his presidency for his drinking. During the election of 1852, the Whigs mocked Pierce as the, quote, hero of many a well-fought battle. That's funny right there. I don't care who you are. James Buchanan. Oh, James. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have had a gay president. Buchanan was the only U.S. president that remained a bachelor his entire life. As president, he was virtually inseparable from William R. King, a senator from Sweet Home, Alabama. Keeping near constant company with each other, the pair were nicknamed Miss Nancy and Aunt Fancy by Andrew Jackson. Aaron Brown referred to King as Buchanan's wife and better half, suggesting their relationship was not quite as closeted as one might think. Obviously, this situation raised many questions, the first being about Buchanan's sexual preferences and whether or not he was, in fact, gay. Although much of the evidence is circumstantial, it is nonetheless overwhelming. For instance, Buchanan never married, was a lifelong bachelor, and for many years he lived with Senator King. In addition to these facts, and according to historian James Llewellyn, Buchanan instructed relatives to burn his private letters after his death. Some surviving correspondence, however, indicates a romantic bond between Buchanan and King. After being appointed minister to France by John Tyler in 1844, King wrote to Buchanan, quote, I am selfish enough to hope you will not be able to procure an associate who will cause you to feel no regret at our separation. The same year, in a letter to a friend, Buchanan wrote of King's absence, quote, I am now solitary and alone, having no companion in the house with me. I have gone a-wooing to several gentlemen, but have not succeeded with any one of them. Despite the preponderance of evidence, neither man ever publicly admitted to being in a romantic relationship. So, has America had a homosexual president? If so, it certainly wasn't out in the open, but it does seem quite likely. Incidentally, the lack of a spouse in the House, the White House, and for that matter, Buchanan's life, caused Buchanan to employ the services of his niece, Harriet Rebecca Lane Johnston, to serve as first hostess of the United States. Buchanan's administration was so contentious that members of Congress often carried knives and small pistols into the legislative chambers. But he was also carrying at times. James Buchanan very quietly but consistently bought slaves in Washington, D.C., and set them free in Pennsylvania on lands that he owned. This brings us to Abraham Lincoln, one of the most controversial presidents in American history, primarily because of the war. Abraham Lincoln is the only president who was also a licensed bartender. He was a co-owner of Berry and Lincoln Saloon in Springfield, Illinois. Lincoln logs are actually named after Lincoln and the log cabin he was born in. John Lloyd Wright, the son of famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright, invented the toy building set. Lincoln was the first president ever to be photographed at his inauguration. In the picture, he is standing near his future assassin, John Wilkes Booth. He's also enshrined in the Wrestling Hall of Fame. Young Abe was an accomplished wrestler. He lost only once in approximately 300 matches, and Lincoln could talk smack with the best of them. According to Carl Sandburg's biography of Lincoln, he once challenged an entire crowd of onlookers after a victory, saying, quote, "I'm the big buck of this lick. If any of you want to try it, come on and wet your horns." There were no takers. Lincoln is also the only president to receive a patent. It was patent number 6469 for a device to lift boats over shoals, and an invention that was never actually manufactured. After Lincoln, we have Andrew Johnson. Johnson, again being Lincoln's vice president, took office after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. He was the first president to be impeached, although not convicted. Again, one of these, Bill Clinton type of arguments that we often have with the great unknowledged. As Johnson was acquitted by a single vote in the Senate, it would be another 134 years before another president, Clinton, would be impeached. Although, like Johnson, Clinton was not removed from office. Something has popped up in several different portions of the book as it relates to slaveholding at the time, and something that a lot of people are probably not aware of. Johnson's father, his name was Jacob, died when he was just 3 years of age. His mother remarried and sold Johnson and his brother as indentured servants to a tailor named James Selby. The brothers ran away after 2 years. On June 24th, 1824, Selby advertised in a newspaper a reward of $10 for anyone that would return the brothers to him. However, they were never captured, soon returned to their mother before moving with her to Tennessee. She didn't sell them because she didn't like them or love them. She sold them out of economic necessity. Eventually, of course, Andrew Johnson, the former indentured servant, vis-a-vis Slay, would go on to be president of the United States. Ulysses S. Grant's first name was Hiram. Hiram Ulysses Grant, changed it because he didn't want to enter West Point with initials HUG. When Congressman Thomas Hammer filed Grant's application to West Point, he thought Grant's first name was Ulysses and assumed the middle name would be Simpson, Grant's mother's maiden name, hence Ulysses S. Grant. Then we have Rutherford B. Hayes, an interesting character in American history and one that was in part responsible for the Compromise of 1877, something that we're also writing on for a future edition of the book, and a compromise that many historians point to the prejudice in the Deep South as well as the expansion of Jim Crow laws. However, Hayes banned alcohol and held gospel sing-alongs every night at the White House. He also started the tradition of the Easter egg roll on the White House lawn, which has been run on the Monday after Easter since 1878. Then we have Grover Cleveland. Cleveland is the only U.S. president to be elected to 2 non-contiguous terms. This is why we say that Trump is President 45 when there's actually only been 44 presidents. Why? Because Cleveland did it twice. Cleveland's first name was Stephen, but he changed it to Grover as an adult. The Baby Ruth candy bar is named after his daughter Ruth and not Babe Ruth, as some have speculated. He is the only president in the history of this country to hold the job of a hangman. He was once the sheriff of Erie County, New York, and twice had to spring the trap at a hanging. After we get Grover Cleveland, we get Benjamin Harrison. Harrison defeated the incumbent Cleveland in the election of 1888. However, in his bid for re-election in 1892, Harrison was defeated by Cleveland, making it the only time in American history that an incumbent president was defeated by a former president. When electricity was first installed in the White House around midway through Harrison's term, he was so afraid of being shocked that he refused to touch the switches. In the election of 1892 was the first time neither candidate campaigned in a presidential election. Both Harrison and Cleveland relied solely on surrogates instead. Maybe an idea modern-day candidates should consider. William McKinley was the first president to ride in a self-propelled vehicle. It was the electric ambulance that took him to the hospital after he had been shot inside the Temple of Music on the grounds of the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. McKinley was shaking hands with the public when he was shot. The crowd subdued his attacker and began to beat him severely. The wounded McKinley shouted, "Boys, don't let them hurt him." Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy bears were so named because Theodore Roosevelt refused to shoot a small bear cub while hunting. The incident was reported to the news, which inspired a toy manufacturer to come out with the stuffed animal in his honor. Contrary to popular belief, Teddy Roosevelt, and not John Kennedy, was the youngest president. He was 42 when he became chief executive following the assassination of William McKinley. However, in fairness to popular belief, Kennedy was the youngest elected president when he got the office at 43 years of age. Roosevelt was shot by a would-be assassin during his second run for the presidency while giving a speech in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was shot by an anarchist by the name of William Schrenk. Schrenk acclaimed his motive was that any man looking for the third term ought to be shot. Just going to let that hang there. Roosevelt went on to finish the speech with a bullet still lodged in his chest, saying to the audience, "I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot. I give you my word, I do not care a rap about being shot." Not a rap. Yeah, back when men were men. Howard Taft was a big old boy. The largest president, Taft came in at 325 pounds. He was dubbed Big Bill and often got stuck in the White House bathtub, his own advisors having to sometimes, extricate him from the tub. He is also the only former president to serve on the Supreme Court. Though he's best remembered for his one-term stint, Taft became Chief Justice in 1921. Once famously declaring, "I don't remember that I was ever president." Woodrow Wilson, and we're working on a lot of stuff coming up on Woodrow Wilson in a future edition of this program, where I am going to tie the Woodrow Wilson administration, the Federal Reserve Bank, and the sinking of the Titanic all together. It's crazy, weird conspiracy stuff that resides in my head, so I'll save it for later, but mark your calendars. Not only is that going to come up, and we're going to have a video to accompany it, and I'm seriously considering writing a book about it as well. But Woodrow Wilson is a very curious character in American history, and one could make the argument, and I will, that the New World Order begun with his election in 1912. However, he was also an avid golfer. William was known to paint golf balls black during the winter months so he could continue to play in the snow. He is also the only U.S. president buried in Washington, D.C. The 28th president is buried in the sarcophagus at the Washington National Cathedral. William Howard Taft and John F. Kennedy are at Arlington. Warren Harding had some genetic analysis done to prove that proved that the president was the father and fathered a child out of wedlock with long-rumored mistress Nan Britton. Britton set off quite the scandal when she went public with her tale of the tryst in the White House, boldly publishing her story in a 1927 best-selling memoir called The President's Daughter. But historians have long questioned the claim, and Harding's defenders have vilified her as a liar for nearly 90 years. However, based on DNA from Britton's grandson and descendants of Harding, the results are 99.9% accurate. The child born of their union, Elizabeth Ann Blazing, is the only known offspring of the 29th president. We're going to take a real quick break, reload the coffee pot, come back on the other side, and tell you about one of the, if not the most eccentric presidents that we have ever had in all of American history, and some of his unbelievably witty comments and jokes. Then we are going to start on the other side with Calvin Coolidge. But in the meantime, you're listening to Presidential Peculiarities on this edition of The Unknown America, brought to you right here by the Unknown America Project. Stick around. We are coming right back.
I want to see the light.
Hart of America and the Michael Hart Show is brought to you in part by the Unknown America Project. Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities about the greatest nation on earth, explores many of the falsehoods and fallacies and revisions in American history that impact the beliefs and the thoughts of many people in this country today. So if you'd like to learn some of the most enduring myths that have been perpetrated on the American public for the last 100-plus years in this country, go check out the book at heartofamerica.net. That's heartofamerica.net. And pick up a copy of Unknown America. It comes out to you absolutely no shipping, be autographed, and we'll even send you a copy of the United States Constitution as our way of saying thanks. So support the Unknown America Project by simply going to theunknownamerica.com, and thank you for your support.
It's Andrew McLean here to remind you about my podcast, Over the Line. This is the podcast your mom warned you about, even though your mom doesn't really know what a podcast is. You really need to check it out. We have some great guests, amazing interviews, and we break down the political headlines of the day. If you want to be able to stay informed, entertained, and be able to win an argument on Facebook against those commie hippies, check out OverTheLineShow.com to listen to the latest show, check out some amazing merch, and see what's going on behind the scenes. Over the Line is also available on your favorite podcast platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, CastBox, and plenty more to make it as easy to listen to the show as possible. Again, make sure you go to OverTheLineShow.com, sign up for the newsletter, and keep up with the show, whatever we do, wherever we go, and keep yourself informed. That's OverTheLineShow.com. In memory of Harambe, Danny Williams, and Andrew Breitbart.
You're listening to The Unknown America on the Heart of America Broadcasting Network. This is part of the Unknown America Project. And we would love to have you support our efforts here as we continue to try to educate as many people in this country as we possibly can about the realities of this nation, her history, and her past. You can find out more just by going over, if you haven't already listened to us over there, at heartofamerica.net. That's heartofamerica.net. Also brought to you in part by our friends over at Liberty One Tech. Liberty, the number one tech for all your cyber needs, websites, your security needs. They do a bang-up job over there, and they are responsible for much of this broadcast. So please support the Unknown America Project, the folks over at Liberty One Tech, as well as our good friends over at the Land Report and a couple other folks that we are about to bring on board as well. This is the Presidential Peculiarities edition of Unknown America. And probably one of my favorite presidents in terms of weirdness. And I mean, quirky, witty, weird. I mean, Calvin Coolidge embodies all of those things. He was the only president to be sworn in by his own father. On the night of August 2nd, 1923, Warren Harding died in San Francisco. Coolidge was staying at his father's home in Vermont when the news of Harding's death reached the East Coast. Coolidge was awakened by his father, and after being told the news, Dad, who happened to be a notary public, administered the oath of office to his son by the light of a kerosene lamp in front parlor. Now, how in the world does Dad know the oath of the presidency office? I mean, that's the kind of Americans I'm talking about, folks. This guy, he's a notary public, which made it legal, administers the oath of office to his own son, probably, according to by most historians' takes, verbatim by memory. Now, Coolidge was also a real prankster. On occasion, he would press all the buttons on the president's desk, hide behind the door until his staff ran to the Oval Office. He'd then pop out from behind the door and say if he was just trying to see if everyone was working. He was also considered by many to be hyper shy and perhaps standoffish, even somewhat eccentric. He rode a mechanical horse as much as he could while acting like he was a cowboy. And he often walked around with a raccoon that was perched behind his neck in the White House. He was also very witty. His wit was described as sharp and cold as frost etching on a window pane. At a dinner party, a woman sitting next to him tried to make a wager with Calvin Coolidge, telling him that she bet she could get him to say more than 2 words. Coolidge famously responded, "You lose." And in probably one of the funniest stories I have ever heard, period, let alone from a president, Coolidge and his wife, First Lady Grace, both visited a government farm on separate tours. During her tour, the First Lady went to the chicken yard and showed some interest in a prize rooster. The farmhand told her the rooster could mate several times a day. Mrs. Coolidge asked, "Tell that to the president when he comes by." When the president arrived for his tour of the same farm, the farmhand told him what the First Lady had said. Coolidge responded, "Same hen every time?" The farmhand responded, "Oh no, Mr. President, a different hen every time." To which the president replied, "Tell that to Mrs. Coolidge." Harry S. Truman. The letter S in Truman does not stand for anything. As such, it is grammatically correct to spell his full name without a period after it. A story that has a link to events going on in America today. Because the Ku Klux Klan was a powerful political force at the time, Truman was encouraged to join the organization. According to some accounts, he was inducted through though he was never active. Other accounts claim that he gave the KKK a $10 membership fee, but demanded it back. He was never initiated. In 1946, Truman wrote to his wife that he thought the White House was haunted. In the letter, Truman penned, "The damn place is haunted. Sure as shooting. You and Margie had better come back and protect me before some of these ghosts carry me off. But while Truman was certain the People's House was a hotbed of paranormal behavior, what likely had Truman so spooked was the constant creaking, popping, and moaning of a crumbling building that was 140 years old and contained numerous additions that had been added over the years. And it was for this reason, in 1949, the Trumans moved out, taking up residence across the street at Blair House, while the White House was taken down to its bones and completely restored. The Trumans moved back on the 27th of March, 1952, bringing with them another first for the White House. That would be television. Dwight Eisenhower detested squirrels, at least around the White House. The reason, in the spring of 1954, the American Public Golf Association installed an outdoor putting green just steps away from the Oval Office. To the dismay of Eisenhower, who, like Wilson, was an avid golfer, squirrels were continually digging up the putting green to bury their acorns and walnuts. Eisenhower was reported to have said to Secret Service agent John Money, "The next time you see one of those squirrels go near my putting green, take a gun and shoot it." The Secret Service, however, wisely decided against bringing superior force to bear, and instead groundskeepers trapped the squirrels and released them into the Rock Creek Park. Taking a look at the life of John Kennedy. Kennedy received last rites at the very least 3 times before serving as president. Kennedy suffered from poor health his entire life, and fearing imminent death, America's first Catholic president received the sacramental last rites of the church on 3 occasions. Some historians have said it could have been as many as 5. This was once during a trip to England in 1947. During the trip, Kennedy fell ill and was given perhaps a year to live after being diagnosed with Addison's disease, a rare disorder of the adrenal glands. He received the sacrament again in 1951 after suffering from extremely high fever while traveling in Asia, and a final time in 1954 after he slipped into a coma from an infection after surgery to address his chronic back problems. And again, some Kennedy biographers claim the number of last rites should actually be 5 times, including when Kennedy was 2 years old and contracted scarlet fever, and another time during World War II while he served on PT-109. Although Kennedy was in fact ill 2 other times, it is not known with certainty if last rites were administered, which is why when I put paper to pen, I stuck with the verified 3 last rites. Lyndon Johnson. Oh, one of these days I'm going to write a book on Democrat presidents and their girlfriends. Because it's hard, you're hard-pressed to find a Republican president. Maybe they just hide it better, I don't know. But whether you're talking about Lyndon Johnson or Kennedy, Clinton, yeah. No real accusations leveled against President Obama, but many Democrat presidents have been, let's just call them, really randy. Johnson affectionately called the many women he slept with his harem. He even had a buzzer system installed inside the Oval Office so that Secret Service could warn him when Lady Bird was coming. We do know for a fact that Bill Clinton, for example, had a Secret Service detachment, as did John Kennedy, to watch over the women. Johnson was elected to the Senate, U.S. Senate, in 1948, after winning a Democrat primary by 87 of the 988,000 votes cast. During those years in Texas, there was so few Republicans winning the primary, all but assured a victory in the general election. Allegations of voter fraud on both sides are still debated to this day. Feeling a little bit of hanging chad here? See, folks, this stuff been going on for a long time. The margin of victory for Johnson so thin, it became known as the landslide Lyndon incident. We've been having many of the same conversations in this nation in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years that we've been having for the last 100, 150. Did you know that Richard Nixon was a Quaker? His mother, Hannah, was so devout in her faith and instilled her beliefs in her husband and children after the failure of his father's lemon grove in 1922. Nixon's family moved to the nearby Quaker community of Whittier. As a boy, Nixon went to Quaker meetings 4 times on Sundays, played the piano at church services. He enrolled at Whittier College, a Quaker institution, and attended mandatory chapel 4 hours every day. Did you also know that Gerald Ford was adopted? His birth name was Leslie Lynch King Jr. He could have also played in the NFL. He won a scholarship at the University of Michigan, which he attended from 1931 to 1935. The university's football team, the Wolverines, won national championships in 1932 and 1933. In 1934, his senior year, Ford was named the team's most valuable player. Upon graduation, he received offers from the Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers, but he turned them down to take a position as the head boxing coach and assistant football coach at Yale University, where he had hoped to study law. And then there's Jimmy Carter, the first known and only known president to go on record as having seen a UFO. Carter was the very first Southerner elected to the presidency following the Civil War. During his administration, he pardoned and restored the U.S. citizenship of Jefferson Davis, who was, of course, the president of the Confederate States of America. Ronald Reagan won the, quote, most nearly perfect male figure award from the University of California in 1940. During the Hollywood Red Scare of the late 1940s and 50s, Reagan was active in the film industry politics as chairman of the Screen Actors Guild. You might know it as SAG. These SAG awards were fairly recent. He became an FBI informer in 1947. Acting as a spy, Reagan was providing the feds with the names of actors suspected of being Communist Party members or sympathizers. The names of the people that Reagan informed upon are redacted in his FBI file, but they were probably already known to the FBI from the testimony of former communists who were its main source of information about party membership in the film community. Because of his patriotism, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover took a friendly interest in Reagan's political career. Shortly before Reagan announced his candidacy for the California governorship, the FBI discovered that his adopted son, Michael, had unknowingly become close friends with the son of reputed mafia boss Joe Bananas. His real name is Joseph Bonanno. Hoover agents tipped off Reagan so that he could warn son Michael to break off the association before it became an embarrassment and possible political baggage. Everybody's got a closet, y'all. And it kind of really brings to light, some of the discussions that we have about presidents, vice presidents, congresspeople today. In a fallen world, you're going to elect fallen people. You are going to elect people that have a past, that have things they would probably rather cloak, if you will. And all throughout the history of this country, we have demonstrated that is exactly the case. George Bush, the first, played first base at Yale and was team captain. He played in 2 College World Series and had a career batting average of .251. Bush was known to be very, very loyal, dedicated, stand-up guy. Not the most charismatic president in American history, but he honored tradition, his vows, his family, and his nation. After Ronald Reagan was shot by would-be assassin John Hinckley, aides wanted Bush to chop her back to the White House, but he refused, saying that only the president lands on the south lawn of the White House. So he flew to the vice president's residence instead. Little things like that. Bill Clinton was named after his biological father, William Jefferson Blythe Jr., a traveling salesman who died 3 months before Bill's birth. Clinton did not assume his stepfather's surname until he turned 15 years of age. During his senior year in high school, Bill Clinton went to Washington, D.C. as a delegate in an American Legion civics program called Boys Nation. While on the trip, he met President John F. Kennedy. Bill Clinton also won Grammys for Prokofiev, Peter in the World, and My Life, his autobiography. There's a Bill Clinton Boulevard outside the U.S. located in Pristina, Kosovo. The boulevard is named after Clinton for his help in the Kosovo War of 1998 and 99. A 10-foot-tall statue of Clinton was added to the boulevard in 2009. George W. Bush was arrested for leading a crowd of Yalees, in a post-match celebration which involved scaling the goalpost and trying to tear them down following a Yale-Princeton football game in 1967. Interestingly enough, Bush was also arrested at the university a second time less than 6 months prior, while drunkenly stumbling through the streets of New Haven in December of 1966. As the story goes, Bush and his friends noticed a huge Christmas wreath on the front door of a shop. The bunch tried to make off with the wreath, only for police officers to drive by at that exact moment and catch them in the act. Bush would later admit that, quote, he might have had a few beers. Bush has also been accused of being the president that's the stumbling, and I don't mean just the stumbling like Gerald Ford, but that he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but then he's the only president with an MBA. This brings us up to Barack Obama. Obama applied to appear in a black pinup calendar while he was studying at Harvard, but was rejected by the all-female committee. Obama won the Best Spoken Word Album Grammy Awards for the abridged audio book versions of Dreams from My Father in February of 2006, and for The Audacity of Hope in February of 2008. He beat Bill Clinton, who was seeking his third Grammy with Giving, How Each of Us Can Change the World, a Call to Public Service. Barack Obama also owns a pair of boxing gloves once worn by Muhammad Ali. And, of course, finally, this brings us up to Donald Trump, who has never smoked cigarettes, consumed alcohol or drugs. His older brother, Fred, was an alcoholic for many years and warned Trump to avoid drinking. Fred ultimately died from his addiction. Trump's residence, Trump Tower, was actually used as the fictional Wayne Enterprises in the Batman sequel, The Dark Knight Rises. And finally, Trump has actually run for president once before. He won the California primary, the presidential primary, for the Reform Party in the year 2000. Kind of squashes the claims by many that he's an untried politician, that he is outside the circle, that he doesn't understand. No, he's been quite politically active for many years in this country, and like I said, already a presidential candidate. And yet again, you see another glaring example people in this country that think they have a good bead on things, that they've got things all figured out, that they understand the history of this nation, and things just, frankly, could not be further from the truth. There is a lot that goes on in our history, and that's one of the reasons that in the next few weeks, I'm really having to tie some strings up on this one, where we go all the way back to, well, the 1700s, and we take a look at the very first and the philosophy behind a central bank in this country and bring it all the way forward, well over 100 years into the year 1918 and the conclusion of World War I, and where that left us in this country, economically speaking, and some of the disasters that occurred along the pathway to get us from there to where we are today. Yes, I am telling you in no uncertain terms that if you don't study the past, if you don't pay attention to what's going on in this nation's history, you just don't really see what's going on in the world around you today. And there's a lot of things that have been claimed, a lot of things that have been said. You know, we talk about Margaret Sanger and her eugenics ideologies. You know, we talk about, things related to the former presidencies and America at war, and so many of the domestic atrocities and immigration in this country and what previous administrations have said and stood for. And people just shake their heads sometimes in disbelief. They can't really see for what's going on in the world around them because they don't understand the realities of our history, where we've been, what we've done, where we failed, and what we were warned of. Not just by the founding fathers, all throughout the history of this country. You know, I forgot the guy's name, but there was even one of the former directors of the United States Department of Education. This is back in the 40s or 50s, making a claim about the purposeful dumbing down of Americans because it was going to be quite easier to manage a population. Really think about it. Doesn't that make sense? I mean, isn't it easier to herd an uninformed group of people? Elizabeth Freeman. Freeman was a slave. Her slave name was Mum Bet. There's been books written about her. Mum Bet was taught to read by her master, for lack of a better way of putting it. And through her readings and her learnings, and for some reason he took her under his wing, she learned that she had rights. And she eventually sued him for her freedom and won in a court of law. And that was not the only time in America. There was another one by the name of Elizabeth Graham in New York who was kicked off of a streetcar because blacks were not allowed to ride streetcars. She hired an attorney. His name was Chester Arthur. He'd become president of the United States. And won. Sued the living bahoo out of the streetcar company. Why do we not teach that in history? Well, for one thing, people need to realize it wasn't illegal to teach blacks how to read. It was highly discouraged, and yes, it could get you killed. But the reason that the late colonists in particular, and through much of the 1800s, did not want blacks to read is that they might learn that they did have rights. Now, post-1877 in Reconstruction, getting a court of law to hear a slave's case in the Deep South would have been tough. I won't argue that point. But if you could get a court of law, a judge and a jury to hear a case, with amazing frequency, African Americans won court case after court case in this country. They were prevented from learning because they would be a threat to the law. Now, Am I saying that America was pristine in this time? No, absolutely not. But it's also not true. And yet that same dumbing down of America continues to this day. And it happens to the blacks, but it happens to the whites. It happens to everybody in this nation. Because the political machinery in this country sees no benefit whatsoever in you understanding what's really going on in the world around you. And that's why we call this the Unknown America Project. We ask you to support the project, to buy the books. We're working on the board game of saying thanks. So support the Unknown America Project by simply going to theunknownamerica.com, and thank you for your support. The Land Report, the magazine for the American landowner, is a proud supporter of the Michael Hart Show. Currently, there are brought to you in part by Liberty One Tech at libertyonetech.com and the Unknown America Project. To learn more, go to theunknownamerica.com.
Anyone can tell you the news.
We welcome Diamond and Silk.
Mark Zuckerberg will end up, and it's going to be a face without the book.
Book without the face.
Hey, Megan, how are you?
Now they're chipping away at the normalization of pedophilia, and the left is embracing this type of behavior.
We welcome Dinesh D'Souza.
I know I ticked him off. In a certain sense, it's a giant up yours to Obama, and that's why the left is freaking out over it.
Jack Kennedy and LBJ, Clinton, and the double standard from the left.
Yeah, I love how the left does nothing but push the most bizarre practices down our throats and up our tailpipes.
It takes a real man to tackle the hot issues that really matter.
Michael Hart is the man of this house.
Welcome to the Michael Hart Show.
Hey, welcome back. Two big stories right here in Birmingham, Alabama, and then, of course, the State of the Union address yesterday. And the story out of Hoover, and for those of you that are not in the area, suburb south of Birmingham, Alabama, where on Thanksgiving evening a young man was shot by a local police department. After an investigation that lasted approximately 2 months, came out yesterday that the Attorney General, Steve Marshall, in the state of Alabama, had determined that the shooting was justified. And I've got my good buddy. He's been on the program a couple of times before. I'm on frequently with him, as well as his great program, Outspoken, right here on the Charter Spectrum cable outlet right here in central Alabama. And I do mean the whole central part of the state, on Channel 80 every single evening beginning at 6 p.m. is our good friend Joe Lockett to give us some insights on this. And then I want to play a piece of audio from E.J. Bradford's father, because as you can well imagine, he is beyond pissed off. And so let's welcome in Joe to this edition of the program. How are you, Lockett?
Good morning, Michael. How's it going? I'm doing good. At the gym. Took a break to come in and talk to my good friend Michael Hart.
Well, I appreciate that, Joe. I did catch Outspoken last evening, and, you and I actually did a real good job trying to break things down. Very sad story indeed. And, I know that you've only got a few moments to spend with us, but considering the fact that you and I have talked about this so many times in the past, and there's been much discussion about, things such as, what time frame this took. Was it 3 seconds, 4 seconds? The officer was defending himself. He had to excuse the expression, neutralize the situation to the best of his ability. What are your thoughts on the investigation, and what are you hearing through your contacts?
Through whatever I'm hearing, of course, in the black community, it's mixed emotions after all the evidence has come out for the case of EJ. On one end, Michael, people are upset because it didn't go to trial. And then there are people saying they understand why it did not go to trial. The parents are really upset about it. They're going to they're going to try to take it to civil trial and see what they can get there. I think from my point of view, Michael, I see it from both sides. And then, you say you watched the show last night, and I tell your listeners basically my breakdown of this is that I respect Attorney General Steve Marshall, but I think due to the beginning discrepancies of the Hoover Police Department of how they handled the situation, I think it should have at least gone to trial to see was there any rush to judgment or could there have been another solution. Because the officer saw the situation. He saw Brian land on the ground. He saw EJ with a gun, which I would have assumed the same thing. The question that I have, and I ask your audience to ask themselves this question: Michael, did he have to shoot the guy 3 times running away?
Yeah, and I know there's been a lot of discussion about that, and then of course what we end up having is, knowing that Bradford had the gun and the amount of time that the officer, had, and it even kind of goes back to something that Ashley had said last evening on your broadcast, and I'm paraphrasing something to the effect of, she doesn't carry a gun, but if she did, you'd be getting everything I got. And right. I don't know if that was the officer's response. I don't know. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I'm kind of like you, Joe. I'm kind of on both sides of it. And then listening to the comments from Bradford's father and speaking to going and taking it to a civil court, and how unbelievably upset they are, because I still think there are some unanswered questions. And I don't know why they did not necessarily take it to trial, unless their concern was that, number one, it might create, further unrest, or number two, that, it might imply some sense or belief of possible guilt. I don't even know how that's working in this case, but I'm not satisfied completely, because as you are well aware, being on TV and me being on the radio and all the audio and video that we cut all the time, not that anything was cut in what we saw, but videos they're not always the best source of proof and information. They can be misinterpreted.
Yeah, I mean, I watched it, Michael. I'm going to say at least probably about a good 50 or 60 times. From what the report says, I agree by law the cop did what he had to do. My only question to this is that, and I said it last night, we've seen these situations where white assailants has had guns themselves, and they was judged by 12 and not carried by 6. And so my question, and we would never know this answer in that particular situation, if it had been a white assailant with a gun, would have said freeze, stop, and not killed him or fired a warning shot or shot him one time? It just seems like in the black community that when these situations happen, because by law and by the Constitution this can happen, and, when you look at the bigger scale of it, okay, by law is right. We end up being buried by 6 instead of judged by 12. I'm not saying in all situations, but it just happens a lot, and I see it. And so when he shot 3 times, he's running away. This is a trained cop with the situation. He wasn't that far away. So when you hit him, I know adrenaline is pumping, but actually the adrenaline, and the officer 1, as it was stated in the report, adrenaline is different. Ashley is scared. He's trained. And so when he popped him once or twice, that third bullet, like I said, if I'm going to question, I would question the excessive shot that he shot him. And I think it was because his adrenaline was pumping.
Help me understand something, because I've kind of stepped back from the story and purposely not consumed too much of the facts of it. And what I mean by that is I'm watching the media's response to it, because I'm covering it more from the media's coverage than I am the actual breakdown of the story itself. I hate even saying it, but the headshot, which number of bullet was that? Do you know?
I think, Michael, I think it was the first or the second one.
Okay.
Because I think he shot him up top first, and the farther he went away, the bullets went down.
So essentially, the very first shot is the kill shot.
The very first shot was the kill shot because he was falling at that point. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
He shot him in the head, shot him in the neck, and he shot him in the back. So the first shot was the kill shot. Then he got a shot in the back. Then he got a shot in the shoulder. I think he got shot in the neck. And then as he was falling, he shot him in the back. And if you look at the shots, they're like, right there, the cop was a good shot. So he shot for the head. He shot to kill.
Yeah,
and
well,
like I said,
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I just said, hey, you know, when they went up the escalator, for the people who were standing there, just imagine you're coming up an escalator. To your left, you see somebody down that's bleeding. To your right, you see somebody that's down on the floor bleeding. To your right, you see somebody running away from the gun. You, the police, coming up the escalator, and you see somebody running with a gun. Of course, your quick assumption of anybody who sees that's going to say, this man just shot that guy. And so you're going to try to neutralize the situation. There's a mall, it's Black Friday, you see everybody running around the mall, and so of course you're trying to neutralize the threat. I get that. But, like I said, the question that I have, Michael, 3 shots, and would it have been a white assailant? Would they have said, freeze, stop? Those are the questions I have. And due to the situation of how Hoover screwed up the investigation day one, I think they owe EJ and his family at least that much to let it go to trial.
Well, you know, definitely the optic of the way that the PR optic there in Hoover, you know, it was, you know, leading a lot to question. And of course, as you point out, you know, there's also been the argument about the reopening of the mall, the fact that it was the Christmas, you know, it was the kickoff of the Christmas holiday season, technically speaking. So, you know, there was a lot of debate about whether or not, because people need to realize that are outside this area, we are talking about the largest mall in the state of Alabama. So, you know, it has a major impact on this area. But I'm going to ask you a question, Joe, and I'm asking you this question, and I probably wouldn't ask it of others, but, you know, you and I are friends. We've talked about this many times before. Had this thing gone to court and there had been an exoneration of this officer, would the black community have accepted that verdict?
No. But to the extent of the law, it went as far as it could. There was never going to be, this is just me. I'm not speaking for the black community, but I don't think so, Michael. Because what would have been said is that the justice system is not for the black people. But at least if Steve Marshall would have sent it to trial and the police officer was exonerated at trial, he could have said what he thought, but he said, you know, just to be fair, I'm going to go ahead and send this to trial and see what happens. And if it goes there and it happens, it's not on Steve Marshall, it's not on the trial, and at that point, the Attorney General has done everything he could to the fullest extent. And to that point, he could have put Hoover Police Department on blast for what they did, because what they did to that family, the characterization of their son, that he was not the killer, he was not